Sleep is good, he said, and books are better. George R.R. Martin.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses. I figured we would start off this month with a bang and get the biggest genre that a lot of our followers and listeners have at least some aspect of in their writing. Today we are talking about spec fic, mostly fantasy, but a lot of the other genres that go alongside that.
For those who may be a little bit new to this whole thing, spec fic is speculative fiction. This will include genres such as fantasy, sci-fi, steampunk, dystopian, really anything that takes place on a different planet, in a different world, or on an alternate universe of our planet that breaks the laws of nature, that there's something different about it, that's not how we operate.
This month we are talking about marketing, and we are using this who, what, when, where, why formula in order to break down the specifics of each genre and how people who are marketing this particular genre are going to have very different rules for their marketing than people who are doing other genres.
The who, when it comes to spec fic, is pretty easy. They're nerds.
A lot of the more classic definition of that word will lean toward the males, especially like the people who are gamers, the people who play a lot of D&D, Magic the Gathering, those kinds of nerds. We first imagine male, and a lot of your high and epic fantasy is male.
This goes back to your classic sci-fi fantasy realms. Your early Star Trek, your early Star Wars, the Lord of the Rings, a lot of that was a very male-dominated space. However, it is becoming less male-dominated in modern times. A lot more women are stepping into it, especially with the introduction of romantasy, where you have a pretty even split in a story's plotline between a romantic aspect and a fantasy aspect.
I will also say millennials are going to fall into a lot of this category. You've got a burst of retirees that like the hard sci-fi, which would fall under the spec fic. But for the most part, millennials are the ones who are investing in fantasy. We're the ones who grew up with comic books and the Lord of the Rings movies and Star Wars and these kinds of things. So we're the ones who are going, yes, I want more of this fantasy type element.
If you really think about it, the millennials are the ones that, in our formative years, amazing productions like The Lord of the Rings was coming out, and the Star Wars prequels, and yes, you can argue the Star Wars prequels are not that great, but they were in our youth. And you also had Harry Potter coming out and the books, and it made a lot of millennials very interested in what was a very classical nerd culture. As millennials came into adulthood, nerd became cool. We started to get jobs and we started to collect all the shiny things associated with those stories that we really loved that are often in the speculative fiction realm.
Yeah, millennials also have a lot more of this Pokemon Tamagotchi mentality of I have to collect all of the things. They're very much the magpie of the generation collection. If you want evidence of that, reach out to Lee. She can send you a picture of her desk, which has Brandon Sanderson action figures all over it. And she's got 7 different versions of the same book scattered across 4 different bookshelves, because this one's pretty.
This one's the usable one. This matches the rest of the books. This is my pretty copy.
We haven't had sprayed edges since like the Middle Ages until now, because millennials like shiny.
You will also find within this realm, within the Who, you will find a lot of enjoyment of YA. And that a lot of the fantasy, a lot of the speculative fiction are going to be YA in nature. So you're also going to be catching some of the very younger Gen Zs and the older Gen Alphas as they start to get through this 12 to 18-year-old reading range.
So what about the what? What should my book be like in order to market to the right kind of people?
Your cover is going to be one of your most essential whats when it comes to marketing elements. The font, the imagery, everything about the cover is what will draw people in first. When it comes to fantasy, You will see a lot of very thin lettering. A lot of people call this the Holly Black font or the Cruel Prince font because that's kind of where it got its start. It's a serif font that's very thin, that has a couple of swirls through it, and it is very fantasy-esque. In your sci-fi, you're going to have impact style fonts that is very thick, very sans serif.
A lot of the newer fantasy that you'll find, especially at Barnes & Noble or these other larger bookstores, will have most of the cover taken up by the text and weird ornamental pretties all over the place, like lots of rose petals and bones and dragon wings and this and that.
And a lot of filigree vine sort of designs that frame the whole thing.
That leans into the Pokemon collector shiny.
And of course, your content is going to be another big what. You have to know what the content is that people are going to be interested in. A really big thing, especially with romantasy becoming as large as it is, are going to be spice. This is kind of your movie rating for books. Some people will rate it 3 chili peppers out of 5 or whatever, just to let people know as a sort of content warning in a very specific way to let them know what they're going to encounter.
Fantasy and sci-fi also allow authors with more inhibitions to access some very human things. A lot of your darkest stories, we can get away with publishing them because it didn't happen on Earth. There's a separation between here and our politics and this and that, and the reader and the character in their world. So you've got room to address the more socially thematic things that you can't necessarily in a modern day thing. So you will often find your content to be almost philosophical in the way it approaches things like neurodivergence and childhood trauma and these kinds of things because we can do it in a fantasy realm.
You'll also need to lean into the not quite tropes, but the major aspects and elements of your story. Is it a chosen one story? Is it a hero's journey? Is there swords, sorcery? Another big one right now is, are there dragons? Knowing these big plot elements that people are interested in reading is a good way to help market your book without giving too many spoilers.
So when do we release these books? If you're releasing one a year, which is fairly standard for a lot of authors, then autumn and winter are going to be some of your best times. We, as readers, like to have the fire going, have a storm on the window, be snuggled up in my favorite blankie with a cup of hot cocoa, and reading the fantasy book in that kind of setting.
Because I like to escape from the cold, miserable world outside. It provides a very cozy environment to just watch the rain or the snow fall while I'm all snuggled up by a fireplace. But this can also depend on the what of your book, some of the contents, on when is going to be best to release for your specific purpose.
If you have Halloween type elements, end of September is often a popular time to release these. It's the beginning of fall, but then you can have it really ramp up by the time everyone's in the mood for skeletons and necromancy and witchcraft and this and that, which is all very autumnal.
Now for the where. Where are you going to sell Spec Fic? In person, though it is less powerful, you can look for specific events that work for the elements that you have. A lot of fantasy can get some good traction at places like Ren Fairs or Comic-Cons, or go to gaming stores that especially specialize in Magic the Gathering sort of games.
I would also advise trinkets. If you have tattoos that all of the good guys have in your story, have temporary tattoos that you give away or sell with your books. Having those in person saves on shipping costs, and it does help you give them another token to remind them to not just add this to their TBR pile, but to pay attention to it and give it the attention it deserves.
And you will find a very good, strong place to sell these books through social media. TikTok is a big one right now. Instagram is also very strong for selling and getting the word out for speculative fiction stories, especially fantasy and especially romantasy. However, of course, this landscape will change a little bit depending on what happens with TikTok in America.
One of the things that makes social media so powerful is the fact that you're talking to a lot of the millennials, and they have their favorite influencers. If this particular person gets your book and recommends it, or even just does an unboxing video, and someone who might be your biggest fan in the future sees it, you're more likely to be able to get your book in their hands by influencing one person who will then influence everyone exactly in your target audience.
And our last point we need to discuss for Spec Fic is the why. Why are readers coming to you for a story about far-off places and magic or super advanced technology? The top of the list is entertainment. They want dragons and sorcery and magic and crazy advanced technology because they want escapism and entertainment more than anything.
This world kind of sucks. So sometimes it's nice to escape it into a world where right and wrong are clearly defined, where good triumphs over evil, where everyone who should be doing something has the power to do the thing that they're supposed to be doing. All of these elements are very strong in fantasy. There's a lot of escapism and wish fulfillment with your main character in these types of stories. So in order to figure out why people are reading your book, first ask yourself, why did I write the book? I wrote the book because I thought it would be cool to blank. Okay, that's going to be a large part of your marketing because people who are just like you are going to be feeling the same way. And if they don't, they're probably not your target audience anyway. When you're approaching marketing for your fantasy or spec fic book, ask yourself that question and
write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.